Welcome all to the launch of our LSBU 100 Women in Engineering event series. My name is Dean Woodhouse and I am the Senior Corporate Events Officer here at London South Bank University. We're delighted to be joined by so many people and to start this event series with you today. I'd like to hand you over to LSBU's Pro Vice Chancellor of Education, Professor Deborah Johnston.
Thank you, Dean. Good afternoon and welcome. As Dean said, I'm Professor Deborah Johnston and I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor of Education here at London South Bank University. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to LSBU 100 Women in Engineering. Before I start, I want to share that I do have a stammer. I will get stuck on words and it will be perfectly fine. So 100 years of LSBU teaching women engineering. And in 1920, when LSBU started teaching women engineering, we were one of the first universities in England to do so. And this is one of the first of a series of events to celebrate that history, to look back to the past, and also to reflect on what it means for the future. So what does it mean for the future of women in engineering? So it's an important event for us in LSBU, for our university, for our college, for our academies. And I'd say it's an important event for the professional discipline of engineering. And we've got three aims for this evening. First and foremost, to celebrate our work within LSBU, our engineering work. Secondly, to celebrate the leadership of women in engineering in the UK. And thirdly, to look forward and to say, how can we break down the barriers for women in engineering, and how can we help them build careers where they can really make an impact. So an important event for LSBU, for engineering, and I'd say for those of us who are concerned about gender empowerment. So we're going to hear a lot more this evening about the successes that have been had in doubling the number of women who work within this sector, but also the continued challenges in terms of labour market outcomes, in terms of career profile. So this event is an interdisciplinary event organised by our University School of Engineering, and there are a whole host of people that made it possible. But first and foremost, I have to thank our organisers, particularly Dr. Claire Benson, who is a research fellow in the School of Engineering, Dean Woodhouse in our events team, and Jennifer Hackett in our events team. This event would not have happened without them. And we have to thank them for being able to manage that during this really difficult moment when COVID-19 made it that bit harder. I also want to send thanks to Professor Sushma Patel, also in our School of Engineering, who provided invaluable advice. There are a whole host of LSBU staff and alumni who have contributed both hard work and goodwill so that this event could be successful, this event and the next events in the series. This evening, I'm really pleased to say that we have several of them present. So in our panel session, we have Dr. Katerina Marquez, who I'm proud to say is one of our former PhD students. We have Sunita Mabu, who I'm delighted to say is one of our existing chemical and process engineering students. And we have Ruth McLeod, who is our one of our LSBU archivists, who led that work to uncover the LSBU past. And I also want to thank Dr. Katerina Beaumont, who is the Director of Research in our School of Law and Social Sciences. So a really important interdisciplinary exercise to actually give us the full picture. Of course, I want to thank the Women's Engineering Society, and it's a twofold thanks. Thanks firstly for sending us Helen Cross, who will talk this evening, but also for allowing us to make use of your archive photos, and that's really brought the past to life in this series of events. So with that, I will now hand over to Dr. Claire Benson, who will set the scene for the evening. Claire.
Thank you very much, Professor Johnston, there for that introduction. And thank you very much for hosting this evening as well. It's much appreciated. So my name is Dr. Claire Benson, and I'm a fire and explosion scientist working in chemical and energy engineering. I'm often told by people that that is the coolest job title, to which I always respond that there are actually people who get to do what I do, but in outer space, which is way cooler. But that's the thing about engineering. It's vast and varied, and it's about solving problems wherever they exist. And so many people aren't aware of the fantastic opportunities in the engineering world. 3 years ago, the School of Engineering set up the LSBU Women in Engineering Network to celebrate and encourage studying and working in engineering. It's run outreach events with the South Bank Family and Local Schools Network to expand the term engineering for as many children as possible. And I'd like to share with you a video that was made as part of that work.
It's imaginative, it's challenging, and it's rewarding.
Creative, exciting, world-changing.
Innovation, impact, and solutions.
It's diverse, it's life-changing, it's transformational.
On a daily basis, I do lots of different things.
I perform data analysis and subsurface modelling.
Focusing on data analytics and cognitive computing.
I'm involved in research and enterprise projects about sustainability.
I make materials that provide solutions to global challenges.
I get to use my theoretical knowledge in practical environments and find out how engineers can change the world for the better.
I love engineering because it's challenging. It can really help to solve problems at all sorts of levels.
I love engineering because it helps me express my creativity and you get to break the barriers.
It gives me freedom to deliver positive changes for a better world.
I would tell the next generation of female engineers that if you're a lady who wants to make a change in the world, then this is the career for you.
We need you. If you want to feel empowered, then engineering is for you. Join the top table.
I am a design engineer.
I am a computer scientist.
I am a petroleum engineer.
I am a materials engineer.
I am a chemical engineering student at London South Bank University.
And I absolutely love that video, and I love that I get to work with such amazing women who really are passionate about their work. But this year, we wanted to go bigger. When we realized that we've been teaching women engineering skills and subjects for almost 100 years, we decided it was a fantastic opportunity to learn more about our history and to celebrate and understand our present, as well as to help make a better future. My thanks go to the whole team from an array of LSBU disciplines who've been working over the last few months to make this happen, and I'm very proud to be able to be curator of this program, LSBU 100 Women in Engineering. Ruth MacLeod, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, has done a massive amount of work to discover more about the women who studied with us from 1920, exploring the development of specific courses for women in the 1930s, the formation of a Centre for Women in Engineering in the 1980s, through to researching biographies of some of the most interesting alumni and staff members from across the century. Ruth will be releasing a biography and information for every decade across the next 10 months. And there are some fantastic stories. LSBU staff and students have also been working extremely hard to produce this record of our history. This timeline has sections exploring the history of women in STEM, social history and women's rights, and then 2 sections examining LSBU's history and details of our students and staff from across the century in engineering, tech, and construction. And the timeline will develop further as we release details and biographies across the next year and get to find out more about ourselves. But this year, we want to do much more than look back. We're going to be having a series of events across the year to celebrate and explore what it is to be a woman in engineering, tech, and the built environment. Our next event will be for Ada Lovelace Day and Black History Month and will be aimed at students of all ages. We'll have an LSBU staff, student, and alumni panel, women from entirely BME backgrounds and cultures showing their inspiring work and dispelling myths about who or what an engineer is. And we'll have events each month to showcase the range of engineering disciplines and exploring how engineering can make a better world. We'll be looking at how engineering can solve environmental and sustainability challenges and how it can make an accessible world for everyone. But we'll also discuss how the world of engineering needs to change to be more representative of the people in it. I quite recently heard the story of Marion Donovan, the inventor of the waterproof diaper in the 1940s USA. She was sick of her children's nappies leaking, so she made her own solution, sewing a shower curtain on the outside. She improved and developed the design over time and patented it. She arranged for large-scale manufacturing herself because no one else would buy the design. And just a few years later, she sold the whole company for $1 million. An engineering industry devoid of women will not only not represent them or serve them well, but also misses out on the opportunities to learn, to create much needed solutions, and to enjoy the economic, environmental, and social advantages that can bring. We're very excited about the next year, and I hope very much you will all join us in celebrating and exploring everything engineering has to offer and the amazing women who are such an important part of that. Thank you.
Claire, thank you very much. What a fantastic video. And I love those inspiring biographies and an exciting prospect for the events going forward. We're now going to hand over to Helen Close from the Women's Engineering Society. And Helen's going to talk to us about putting women engineers on the map. Helen.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm just going to switch over to my slide presentation for you and see you on the other side. Right, okay. So, sorry about that. Right, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am the Centenary Trail Project Officer for the Women's Engineering Society. And I'm going to talk to you today about a project called the Centenary Trail Project that we've been working on and how we've put women engineers back onto the map and back into their rightful place in the history of engineering. Firstly, what is the Women's Engineering Society? I asked myself the same question when I started this job. I'd never even heard of it, and I claimed to be a women's historian. So for those of you who've never heard of it, the Women's Engineering Society was founded in the UK on the 23rd of June 1919, after the First World War. As many of us know, women responded to the call to arms of the First World War. During that time, they received education, training and payment and a degree of independence. But when the war was over, the women were expected to retreat to whence they came. The Women's Engineering Society was formed for the training and advancement of girls and women in engineering, and it's still our mission today. The picture you see here is from the Women's Engineer Journal of the WES founding members. Not all of some of the WES founding members, although this picture is slightly later in 1926. Many of the women who founded the Women's Engineering Society were also notable suffrage campaigners. Remarkable women engineers have achieved remarkable things in the last 100 years. but their history has been hidden, forgotten, swept under the carpet along with the dust they were expected to clean up as housewives. It was founded by 7 eminent and mostly wealthy women. You can see their names here. And it was founded with the intention of supporting women into employment and education in the varied fields of engineering. It was the first, and for many years, the only women's engineering society in the world.
Sorry,
But
Helen.
yeah, sorry,
Helen, can't see your slides.
Oh, right. How long's that been for that you haven't been able to?
It's last minute, yeah.
Right, okay, hang on. I wonder why that's... Go back to Zoom. Go. Don't know why that's gone off, sorry. Try again. Am I back with you?
Perfect, yeah.
Right, okay. Modern technology, right. Let me go back. Sorry, I'll just click through these. Right, sorry about that. But 101 years later, women are still underrepresented in the engineering in the UK, with just 12% of engineers being female. Elsewhere in the world, the percentage is higher. The UK is suffering a major skill shortage in engineering, yet half of the population are told from an early age that they're not good enough or that engineering isn't an appropriate career path for them. Wes believes the importance of role models. If you can see it, you can be it. There is a lack of visible role models of female engineers for girls to identify with. So where can they be found? In this digital world, our go-to place for information these days is the online encyclopedia, Wikipedia. Wes realised the best place to improve women engineers' profile was online and via Wikipedia. And with this in mind, Wes wanted to change the representation of women engineers on Wikipedia and applied to the Heritage Lottery Fund to fund our Centenary Trail project. At the time this project was started, Wikipedia was the 5th most visited website of the world, but only 18% of biographies on Wikipedia that are written in English are about women, and only 10% of wiki editors are women. When we started out, there were very few women engineers to be found on Wikipedia. The project has been funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, as I've said, and it celebrates the history of women engineers in the UK. We have run wikithons, or editing workshops, across the country to research, create and improve Wikipedia pages for women engineers. The data that we found, or the data that we accumulate, populate our digital Centenary Trail map, which I will show you shortly. It shows locations where past women engineers and where members of influence have lived and worked. That might sound relatively easy, but in order for information to be valid for Wikipedia, it needs to be backed up by evidence, research, resources, and sources. So where do we find the girls? We have to find them. There are lots of statues of Victorian engineers, but they're all male. There are heroic histories of engineers that have been written, mostly about men. After the major opportunities presented for women in World War I, 1919 legislation placed restrictions back onto working women. Engineering trade unions and engineering institution membership excluded women up until after the Second World War. So we've had to go back to grassroots level, but the women are there to be found. They could be found in census data, patent records, biographies, autobiographies, archive papers, and in journals, particularly the Women Engineer. The Women Engineer Journal has been published since 1919. It's been digitised by our colleagues at the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and this was our primary source and starting point for our research, giving us a great amount of detail of WES members and other past women engineers who have disappeared from history. Other sources include ancestry.co.uk and newspaper archives, which give us more details like dates and locations. Much of this research can be done online. And then, of course, there are books which may have been written about particular individuals, and letters and personal papers that have been deposited in museums or archive collections. And now, when a woman engineer page is created on Wikipedia, she shows up on our Centenary Trail map, which can be seen on our website. We originally wanted 200 pins as part of the project. As of today, we have over 340 women engineers showing on the map. It shows the location of women engineers and where they've and either where they've lived or worked. It was originally just for the UK and Europe based, but now due to its success, we are spreading further afield. A click on a pin will reveal more information, and where the link exists, they will take you to that engineer's Wikipedia page and give you more information about that engineer. In addition to the map and wikithons, there's been an ongoing social media campaign on Twitter and Instagram raising the profile of past women engineers. So I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour because I don't have much time and there are so many women that I could talk to you about. So here are some of our previous women engineers. The mother of Wes, who wasn't actually an engineer herself, but was married to a significant male engineer, Lady Parsons, Lady Catherine Parsons, who was instrumental in the foundation of Wes. She was also co-founder of a company called Atalanta, which was a company set up specifically to employ women in engineering work. Her husband, Charles Parson, developed the turbine engine in 1884 and immediately utilised the new engine to drive an electrical generator, which he had also designed. The Parsons steam turbine made cheap and plentiful electricity possible and revolutionised marine transport and naval warfare. At a lecture on women's work in engineering and shipbuilding during the war, given in July 1919, Lady Parsons said, "It's been a strange perversion of women's sphere to make them work at producing implements of war and destruction and to deny them the privilege of fashioning the munitions of peace." Her obituary stated, "She was always at Charles Parsons' side, always there to help him when he needed her, always supporting him with her really powerful mind and ready tact and perfect understanding. Lady Parsons was the possessor of a remarkable character and she was almost fiercely independent. She had in many ways a very masculine brain," that's an interesting concept, "and a love of business, organisation and leadership." My next engineer is Caroline Hazlitt. Caroline had been a suffragette in 1913 and during World War I she trained for secretarial work. She then joined the Cochrane Boiler Company as a junior clerk, drawing up specifications. By 1918, she was managing the London office, supplying boilers to the War Office. Later, she moved to the Scottish factory to learn practical boiler making, and she designed and sold some using the name C. Hazlitt. After World War I, Caroline stayed on in the firm while many women were obliged to leave. In 1919, she saw an advert. Required, lady with some experience in engineering works as an organising secretary for a women's engineering society. And she was hired by Lady Parsons as the Wes secretary, paid for out of Lady Parsons' own purse. In 1925, Lady Parsons broke off relations with Wes after a disagreement with Caroline Hazlitt over the future direction of the society. Caroline was passionate about the use of electricity. She believed it was the key to a woman's life. Way is being made by electricity for a higher order of women set free from drudgery, who have time for reflection, for self-respect. We are coming to an age when the spiritual and higher state of life will have freer development. And this is only possible when women are liberated from soul-destroying drudgery. I want every woman to have leisure to acquaint herself more profoundly with the topics of the day. Hazlitt is responsible for having designed the UK's 3-pin safety plug, having recognised the danger of the 2-pin plug in family homes. Another founding Wes member was Laura Annie Wilson from Halifax. She went from being a textile worker to a suffragette, from an engineering spouse to an independent builder. In 1907, she took part in a weavers' strike at Hebden Bridge, where she was arrested for inciting persons to commit a breach of peace. When she appeared at the magistrates' court She challenged the legitimacy of the court's exclusively male constitution, demanding to be either tried by her peers or be provided with a woman lawyer. She was found guilty and sentenced to 14 days in prison. On her release, Wilson reportedly said, "I went into jail a rebel, but I've come out a regular terror." Weeks later, she was one of 75 women arrested after a suffragette rally at Caxton Hall. She was sentenced to 14 days in Holloway prison. She became the first woman member of the Federation of House Builders, constructing 72 houses for Halifax workers in 1925 to 1926. She was also a founding member of the Electrical Association for Women in 1924, along with Caroline Hazlitt. This interest was reflected in her housing estates, which she built, which had the latest gas and electricity appliances. In 1927, having moved to Surrey from Halifax with her husband, Wilson continued her trade as a builder by purchasing land at Engleford Green. Now, most people have heard of Amy Johnson, born in 1903 in Kingston upon Hull. Johnson achieved worldwide recognition when in 1930 she became the first woman to fly solo from England to Australia. We consider her an engineer. She was one of the first people to actually achieve a ground pilot's license, which meant that she could basically fix her own aeroplane. She married Jim Mollison, and together they made aviation history with and against each other. The Mollisons divorced in 1938, and Amy returned to her maiden name and to flying. She was WES president between 1935 and 1937. She was killed in war service in 1941. I think I've missed one there, sorry. Verena Holmes. Verena was the first practical UK female mechanical engineer to hold the role of WES president, and she's one of my favourites. She developed and patented many inventions during her lifetime, including the Holmes and Wingfield pneumothoracic apparatus for treating patients with tuberculosis, a surgeon's headlamp, a poppet valve for steam locomotives, and rotary valves for internal combustion engines. She held 12 patents for inventions. During World War II, she worked on naval weaponry, and in 1940, she became advisor to Ernest Bevin, the Minister of Labour, on the training of munition workers. She founded the engineering firm of Holmes and Leather in 1946, which employed only women. Using a design created by Holmes, this firm created the first practical safety guillotine for paper, making it suitable for introduction into schools. In 1958, she published a booklet, Training and Opportunities for Women in Engineering. Monica Maurice, known as the Yorkshire Lady of the Lamps. She was founder of the Wolf Safety Monica's father, William Morris, was founder of the Wolf Safety Lamp Company, a manufacturer of safety lamps for the mining and quarrying. He had purchased the business rights from Freeman and Wolf, the parent company, in 1910 in Germany. She completed her education at Mrs. Hoster's Commercial Training in College London, where she acquired a first-class knowledge of office management and qualified as a shorthand writer and typist in 3 languages. In 1931, she was apprenticed as an engineer in Germany with a former parent company, and then the world's largest and most celebrated firm of mine lamp makers. She trained in every department in the company to make sure that she knew everything there was to know. For practical experience, she also visited the coal mines of Westphalia. She made several other visits to Germany throughout the 1930s, and on one occasion she wandered into a restricted zone and saw what she thought was a guidance system. This she reported to the British intelligence authorities on her return, but they weren't interested. But at the outbreak of war, she was summoned to London for a 3-day debriefing. All her experience, her knowledge of technical German, and her familiarity with many of the industrial sites proved invaluable. In 1947, with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, she took part in a British intelligence mission to Germany to determine the extent and subsequent recovery in certain specialised industries. According to her obituary, during this visit, her group were reporting their arrival at a town near Cologne when an arrogant young British captain dismissed their request for accommodation and supplies. She came forward and quietly suggested that she might be forced to pull rank, and suddenly rooms were made available in the local hotel, as well as fuel and rations for the onward journey. Monica married a Canadian doctor, Arthur Newton Jackson, in 1938 at the Chapel of Our Lady on Rotherham Bridge in South Yorkshire. This is her wedding dress, which can be seen at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where many of her dresses are now held. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but I'm going to quickly tell you briefly about Mary Maxwell Chanel, which I've titled A Tale of Bigamy, Blackmail and Bankruptcy and Bombs. Mary Gardner, born Mary Gardner, her husband Reginald Maxwell went by many aliases. He was originally from Australia, but seems to have abandoned his first wife. So Mary and Reginald didn't actually marry until 1937. Whether he ever divorced his first wife, we don't know, although she appears to have turned up in the UK in later years. During the Second World War, Mary started a factory in a cottage in Flor, Northampton, with one foot press and a lot of enthusiasm, and village wives made bombs in secret. She bought local cottages to house the workers. The factory was known as Aeronex. Mary also designed improved propellers and ignitions for emergency buoyancy equipment. Mary was awarded the MBE in 1946, and we have been given, as part of this project, we have been given family papers relating to her life. She doesn't have a Wikipedia page yet. The owners of her personal papers speculate that Mary and Reginald were involved in the Secret Service due to the amount of time he spent in jail, supposedly to keep him safe, but I suspect the reasons for this were far more salubrious. And then finally, Jeannie Dix. Jeannie Dix was the first female member of the Electrical Contractors Association. In 1934, she managed the first permanent electrification of Winchester Cathedral, the installation of new heating and sound systems in the medieval building, famous for its damp. The electrification contract alone was worth £3,000, £500,000 today, and used 5 miles of specially manufactured waterproof cables. Installing heating and electricity in the choir stall lights meant pipes and cables had to be run through the crypt, including the removal and reburying of coffins, except for that of Jane Austen, which was moved gently to one side. The woman's cathedral job received press coverage across the world. Through this project, we have learnt more about some amazing women, and we have improved and created pages through wikithons to increase the online presence. And through collaboration with our partners in the project, we are raising awareness further still all the time. Who is your favourite woman engineer? Is she on our map? If she's not, can you get her there? Thank you for joining me. And if you want to look at the map, the website address is there. And also just have to say thank you to our project partners as well that have helped us with the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Absolutely inspiring. If you can't see it, you can't be it. Thank you for reminding us of that truism. And that really defines the centrality for me of the Centenary Trail map. Wonderful photos and some amazing quotes. Our next speaker is Professor Shushma Patel, who is the Director of Education and Student Experience in our School of Engineering. And she's going to talk to us about the next 100 years of engineering. Shushma.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I'm just going to share my, slide, sorry. Hope you can see that. Should be sharing now. Yep, no? Perfect, thank you. Hello, just a quick introduction to myself. I'm Shushma Patel. I am a Professor of Information Systems and Director of Education in the School of Engineering here at London South Bank University. And just a quick message to Haru. You posted in the chat, you're a computer scientist and should you be here? Absolutely, you should be here. Computing is very much part of the engineering umbrella, the disciplines that fall under engineering. Let me tell you about the School of Engineering. We have 4 divisions which cover a broad range of the disciplines which in engineering: mechanical engineering and design, electrical and electronic engineering, chemical and energy engineering, and then computer science and informatics. Let's have a look at what's happened in the past. And to do this, we need to look at the different industrial revolutions. They highlight the impact of engineering on our society over the last few centuries. And we start off with the first industrial revolution, which brought to us mechanization, mechanical production, the invention of machines away from agriculture to industry. This happened in the 18th century and became the core of our business industry. We saw factories, we saw mass production, coal, non-renewable resources drove those industries. We saw the birth of faster transport, not what we expect now to be fast transport, but certainly a move away from horse and cart to steam, ships and trains. In the 19th century, we saw the second industrial revolution. Here we saw new sources of energy being utilized, electricity and other non-renewable energy resources, including gas and oil. Transport advances, including the internal combustion engine, which we're still refining now in the 21st century. We also saw the birth of different means of communications: radio, telegraph, and telephony. More reliance on steel as we become more industrialized, so chemical synthesis was also important to us. And with the advances in that, the people followed the job, so more urbanization, people moving from rural areas into towns and cities. In the mid-20th century, we saw the advance of computational abilities. Here we saw how electronics, telecommunications, and of course, how computers impacted our lives, the third industrial revolution. We also saw advances in space, biotechnology, and the first man land on the moon. The most notable of the inventions were programmable logic controllers and robots. This led to us using automation for our production lines, for example, and we moved to more pervasive digital technologies, enabling supply chains globally. And in my opinion, this is where we saw the world becoming smaller. Industry 4.0, where are we now? The 21st century, arguably the fourth industrial revolution. What advances have we seen from the end of the last century in this particular revolution? The internet, virtual reality, immersive technologies, 3D printing, and artificial intelligence. What we dreamed about in the third industrial revolution at the end of the last century, we are seeing now. This century, hopefully, we'll see a woman land on the moon. Industry 4.0, as we call the fourth revolution, is where we ask ourselves, what next, and what do we want the emerging technologies to do for us? 22nd century, we don't know. What is it going to be? There have been leaps and bounds in the creative powers of engineers. The gaps between those revolutions have been shorter and shorter. And it's highly probable that the fifth industrial revolution will happen very, very soon. So what impact has this had on us and society as a whole? In all of this, engineering has had a pivotal role. We've needed mechanical, electrical, chemical engineers, computer scientists, and designers to shape our lives as we see it now. All the disciplines that we cover within the School of Engineering. What has been our impact? I've talked about the positive impact, but there's also been negative impact. we've talked about the benefits of the industrial revolutions, but there's been a price to pay as well. This graph shows us the impact of greenhouse gases over the last 40 years. The substantial rise in annual greenhouse gas index, including carbon dioxide emissions, which this graph represents, has increased from 0 in the first industrial revolution in the 18th century, mid-1750s, to 1 in the third industrial revolution in the 1990s. The annual greenhouse gas index has increased by 43% between 1990 and 2018, and 3% between 2006 and 2018, a significant increase over a very, very short period of time. So where will engineering take us in the next 100 years with creativity and innovation that the engineers bring? Fossil fuel usage has had a detrimental impact on the environment, resulting in poor air quality, global warming, and rapidly depleting non-renewable resources. We are working towards developing solutions to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Engineers will be critical to address many of the grand societal challenges. If we take the SDG 11, mass migration to large cities results in urban hotspots. How can we have the infrastructure to deal with the hotspots? Can we learn from the natural environment to help us develop sustainable technologies to manage our resources? The SDGs are not someone else's problems, they're our problems. So how do we get clean water and sanitization, SDG 6, for water security? How can our mechanical, chemical, engineers and designers work together with biologists, social scientists to ensure that we can solve the problems we face now and we will continue to face, and which will be increasingly important in the future? My vision for engineering is based on a multidisciplinary approach based on 3 pillars: teaching, learning, research, and knowledge exchange. It's a curriculum where we focus on students using problem-based learning and acquiring direct real-world experience, which will have a positive impact on our lives. Working closely with other disciplines, I believe discipline boundaries should be blurred. We should have graduates who can work and engage in multidisciplinary teams. This will mean moving away from traditional view of engineering to a holistic systems perspective, which embraces engineering, technology, life sciences, humanities, and social science, enabling us to establish different models of collaborating together. How can we work together and use hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties that exist in the natural world to help us design better ways to harness water in arid and semi-arid regions for water security, or address the shortage of organs and how organs are rejected by 3D bioprinting organs? My vision is the polymath graduate, true to her discipline, but also able to work and think outside the box. We're the pipeline for our future leaders, and I believe that that's where the next 100 years of engineering is heading. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushma. I think only an engineer could have convincingly shown 350 years of global history on a single slide. A really powerful and convincing vision, and convincing about the role of engineering in solving the current global challenges. Our next presenter is Ruth McLeod from LSBU Archives, and Ruth is going to talk to us about the history of women in engineering at LSBU. Ruth.
Thank you. I will just share my screen so you can see my slides. Does that come up okay? Excellent, thank you. Oh, now it's frozen, obviously. No, there we go, right. I am going to talk briefly about the history of teaching women engineering at LSBU and some of the stories that we found as we've been researching this subject over the last year or so. This is by no means everything that we've found. I've only got 10 minutes this evening, so I'm going to do some kind of edited highlights. Claire mentioned that we're going to be publishing a profile a month, so some of the bigger and more complicated stories that we've found will be coming out over the next 12 months. So these are some highlights and some bits about the actual teaching. As I said, it is just highlights, and do ask me if you've got any questions. So we were founded in 1892 as the Borough Road Polytechnic Institute, or the Borough Poly, which is what most people called it. If you see, these are images from our very first prospectus. On the right-hand side in small print, you may be able to see that it says Principal Mr. C.T. Millis, M.I. Mech.E. He was the first principal, and he was one of our first engineering lecturers, which kind of demonstrates that engineering was a founding part of the Polytechnic's teaching programme, and it's obviously continued to be a big part of our teaching ever since. We were also very definitely founded to educate both men and women. It says the object of the classes is to provide sound instruction for young men and women residing in and about South London. Now, we're a very equal opportunities field going there, but we did also have quite a gendered approach. There was quite a distinct women's department. It was very focused on trade, things like dressmaking, laundry, basic cookery, and subjects like languages and music were available to everyone, but a lot of the more kind of engineering focused stuff was very much men only. So in 1919, the Women's Engineering Society approached us and asked if we would admit women to our full-time engineering courses. Rather embarrassingly for this talk, we declined. We said we didn't want to do that, but we were willing to admit them to our evening classes if they were either working in engineering or had experience of having worked in engineering. So in 1920, our women's section advertised that the attention of women students could be directed to the syllabuses in the following departments. That's what the left-hand image is on this screen. It's our prospectus for 1920. And it says engineering department, classes in machine and technical drawing suitable for women tracers, and petrol motor classes. So we obviously wanted to know how many women did this class, and the answer is 1. Her name was Ida Bolt. She is highlighted on the exam register for the year, and very satisfyingly, she had the highest overall mark in the entire class. Some of the men did quite well on other aspects of it, but the highest average mark was definitely Ida. As you can see from the image on the right-hand side, that summarises how many people did the class. There were 70 people in it, and she is the only woman. She is the first of our profiled women for the year, so I'm not going to tell you very much more about her at the moment. I would encourage you instead to go and read the profile on the website. I'll put the link up for that on the end, and I'll get into the chat as well. 10 years later, in 1930, we had listened to the Women's Engineering Society, and we started to offer a course called Simplified Engineering Course for Women, which was done in connection with the Women's Engineering Society. I've not been able to get exact figures for how many women studied this course, because the annual reports that talk about it and our exam registers don't actually marry up perfectly with how many women are listed. So it needs to do a bit more research on that. But after a year, we stopped segregating the classes. Women still did the simplified course, but they were taught alongside the men. And in 1930, we also started offering this electricity in the home, which was essentially electrical engineering for women, which would enable them to sort out their own electrics at home and also to work in demonstrating electrical appliances. Around the same time, we were also offering a course in what we called household jobbing, which was essentially DIY for women. And there was a real increase at this point in us offering practical skills courses for women outside of the maybe traditional household skills. So we wanted to find some more information about the women who actually did these courses. The only way we could do that was by going through our exam registers. Early student records haven't survived for before 1948. So trawling through these was the best way of identifying some of the women. So that is what we did, myself and Joya, who was an intern at LSBU at the time. And so this graph shows roughly the trends in studying. It's for the first 50 years because my numbers get a little bit dodgy after the mid-1970s. And it is very rough, and it's only meant to be indicative of the numbers. I did quite vaguely classify some of the subjects. To people who are studying television might be rather surprised to discover that they've been put down under electrical engineering. But you can see that the numbers never got very high. Mid-20s was the highest we got, and that was for our engineering drawing course, Lady Tracers, in 1939. And that did then drop right off, partly because people stopped doing engineering and drawing as a standalone subject. You will also see that there are some years where there were no women at all, or very, very low numbers. I kind of think of those as what I call the Brian years, because those are the years where there were more men called Brian doing engineering courses than there were women. And even when there were 3 women, there were still more people called Brian. It was slightly depressing sometimes. But what I'm going to do now is talk briefly about some of the students. And the first group I'm going to talk about are the Toe family. Toe is obviously quite a distinctive name, so when I came across more than one of them in the exam registers, I have a little note in my big file of all of these people saying possibly related, and I looked them up, and indeed they were related. They lived in Trinity Church Square, which is approximately 5 minutes walk from LSBU's Borough Road building, and those are the dates that they studied with us. Edith was the oldest, and she started studying with us in 1931. Arthur then started in 1935, and Margaret a couple of years after that. Here are some of their entries in our exam registers. You can see that they've in a range of different sizes. Edith was on her 4th year when I took that image, and at the bottom there is an image from the 1939 National Register, which was drawn up for ID cards for the war. Where it lists that Edith was working as a tracer and draftswoman in heating and ventilating engineering. And Arthur was a draftsman engineer who was actually unemployed, which is quite interesting because engineering was still very much a male profession at that stage. We don't actually know what happened to any of them afterwards. They don't appear to have been members of the Women's Engineering Society. So trying to trace their careers is actually quite difficult. But we know at least that Edith got to work in engineering for some years. That's a picture of the 1940s, just because it's quite indicative of the class at the time, all male. 1950s, I found some statistics for the 1950s which show that there were 489 people studying electrical engineering on day release, and 2 of them were women. So obviously I went to go and track down who the women were, and I found Edna Evelyn Tiger, who was a part-time day student. I asked our student records team if they could find anything about her, because by the 1950s our student records have improved a bit and we've got more of them, and to find out about her. She was working as a BBC recording engineer throughout the time of her studies. She later on married a fellow BBC engineer, and they lived in St John's Wood. In my sort of fantasy of what might have happened in her life, I like to think that maybe she made available. And the BBC record are. I'm going to skip the 60s and 70s and go on to the 1980s because that is when we founded the Women in Engineering Centre and the HNC Certificate in Engineering Electronics Women Only. I'm not going to talk about them very much because some of the people who are involved in the founding of it are on the panel later, and they know much more about it than I do. So what I'm going to do is say there are some contact details, more details for events that are coming up. You can find the profile on that second link and our Twitter feed. I'll put it in the chat as well. And that's it. Thank you very much. Sorry, that was a bit of a rattle through, but hopefully you got some of it. If there's questions, I'll pick them up in the chat in a minute.
Ruth, thank you so much. I want to thank you for 2 things in particular. Firstly, for actually showing us how you had to carefully piece together that invisible history. But secondly, for coining the concept of the Brian years. I think everyone loves it. I want to hear about that again and again. Fabulous. The next part of our evening is a panel session, and in the panel we will look at both the current landscape and talk about what can be done to both increase the visibility of women in engineering and break down those barriers to a really successful career profile. It's going to be interactive, so if you haven't already, please be putting your questions in the question and answer box. I think there are a couple there, and we'll be putting those questions to our panelists. Before we do that, every panelist will get a couple of minutes to actually talk about themselves and, you know, how they came to be a woman engineer. And our first panelist that I'm going to ask to introduce herself is Dr. Caterina Marquez. Caterina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to join this fantastic event. So I'm Caterina Marquez. I'm a senior research fellow at London South Bank University, and I guess I have a bit of an unusual career path. So I studied food engineering at the university, and then I did a placement in refrigeration with Bristol University. So straight away I've changed subject area. This has led to a job with Adande, which is a refrigeration cabinet manufacturer, and also to an Industrial Case Award PhD with London South Bank University. So for 12 years, I worked both in industry and academia throughout my PhD and during 2 knowledge transfer partnerships with Adande and LSBU. And now I'm back full-time at LSBU, working in research, and I'm mostly managing a big Innovate UK funded project that is developing a smart energy network that combines heat, power, and transport. And that's the beauty of engineering, is that it's a lot easier to move between subjects compared to other professions. Just quickly, just on promoting women in engineering. So I'm part of a steering group on women in refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pumps. This is part of the UK Institute of Refrigeration. And our group has been very successful at making refrigeration more appealing to women, and due to mentoring opportunities, and we have a stronger social media presence. I'm also proud to lead the Careers in Refrigeration Working Group, and this is from the International Institute of Refrigeration. And we normally organize these speed networking events, and they are held at international conferences or industry fairs. And the idea is to link students with senior academics and industry representatives. So in this case, we are more promoting careers in this sector to young people in general, but obviously to women specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Caterina. I'm now going to pass over to our next panelist, Linda Edwards-Shea, who was founder of the Women in Engineering Centre. Linda.
Hi, thank you very much, Deborah. And how delightful it is to be here. It's a while since I've been at South Bank, but I will always support the initiatives that you do for women in engineering. I started out back in the day in the 1960s as a kid. I went to a girls' school. The headmistress was a mathematician, so I was very lucky. I studied somewhere where science and maths was not deemed to be an unsuitable subject for a girl. But I was mad about nature and animals, and I decided I wanted to be a biologist. So that's what I planned for. And I did A-levels in biology, chemistry, and physics, which was a sort of standard combination in those days. I'm not sure it still is, actually. And I got a place to study microbiology at Surrey University. But in fact, what happened was I decided I didn't want to be a microbiologist because all the adverts I saw were about brewing beer, and I really wasn't interested in beer. So I went to Lancaster Polytechnic, now Coventry University, to do a joint honours degree in zoology and chemistry. I had to do a third main subject, which by default was physics. I got very bored with the chemistry and the biology, and I became a physicist, and I graduated in 1978 with an honours degree in applied physics, and went off to work for British Aerospace. By the way, I did something incredibly useful and wonderful as part of my applied physics course at the Polytechnic. I did a sandwich year. I would urge everybody who can take a sandwich year to do so, because it's a wonderful experience and you learn so much in that time. And I worked at British Aerospace. I worked on several projects specialising in the infrared. And after 2.5 years, I left there and I took a change. I went into scientific publishing and worked in Amsterdam in the Netherlands for 1.5 years, but I got very bored with that. I was beginning to find out by now I get bored easily. So after 1.5 years there, I came back to the UK and did a master's degree at Imperial College in applied optics, intending to take a job in optics, but in fact I went into electronics and I worked for GEC for about 3 years, I think. I'm not sure how long actually, I forget. But from there, in 1983, GEC got involved in the precursor of the Women in Science and Engineering year, and which was 1984. But in 1983, I went out with female colleagues to talk to groups of female students. One of the groups I talked to was the women only course at South Bank University, which in those days was led by the wonderful Mary Eyre. We used to joke about Mary. We used to say, we might not know Mary ourselves, but we all know somebody who knows Mary. And Mary was brilliant. I went along, gave a talk to the women on the course and with one of the technicians. We were very keen at GEC not to just talk about chartered engineer status or senior scientist status. We wanted to talk about technician and technical support staff as well. Anyhow, I went and gave a talk, and a couple of years later, Mary Eyre phoned me up and she said, there's a vacancy at South Bank University. I think you should apply for a job. So I did. I applied and I became a lecturer at South Bank University. And at last I found the thing that made me tick. It was teaching, actually. And absolutely loved working in engineering, working in the labs, teaching everybody. I ran the women only course leading to an HNC in electronics after Mary Eyre gave up looking after that course. And at the time, there was a dean of engineering called Alan Maddiford. Alan Maddiford was the brainchild behind the Women in Engineering Centre. He was very keen to get funding into the university, like every dean in every university. And we had European social funding to run the women-only electronics course, and he wanted European social funding to actually open a Women in Engineering Centre. So with Alan, I worked with Alan and also Professor Bridget Shield, who is still Professor Emerita at South Bank University, or London South Bank University as it is now. So the three of us decided to recruit someone to run the Women in Engineering Centre. And we were so lucky because we found Kate Viscardi. And Kate was absolutely brilliant and ran the Women in Engineering Centre. So I've gone on a bit. That's a bit of my background and a little bit about how the Women in Engineering Centre was set up. So I'll stop talking now. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Our next panellist is Professor Alison Leary, and she is Chair of Healthcare and Workforce Modelling, again at LSBU. Alison.
Thank you. I'm a bit of an imposter because I work in the School of Health. But I actually started my career at the Polytechnic of the South Bank, as it was then, 35 years ago, doing work experience in engineering, in mechanical engineering and chemical engineering. And at the time, I come from South London, and people just didn't go to university. So it was a real experience for me. And I ended up doing HNC electrical engineering, which I loved, and I did that for about 10 years. I'll turn my video off because I think my Wi-Fi is not working very well. If it breaks, it's engineering, right? So After that, I love working in biomedical engineering. I love working in the NHS. So I actually trained to be an adult registered nurse. And I worked in oncology for about 10 years. And I worked in oncology research and in acute care. And I did a PhD in clinical medicine and a postgraduate medical degree. So I went sort of from a very male-dominated world to a very female-dominated world, which was kind of a bit of a culture shock for me, actually. And from then on, I've come back to my first love, which is mathematics and data science. So whoever was saying about computer science, is it engineering? I think it is. Engineering to me is quite often about helping people solve very difficult problems. So it all kind of lined up for me. And my interest now really is in looking at the data that's generated in the NHS and how we can make patient care safer through using computational mathematics. So I'm very lucky that I get to work with lots of different people at the university and at other institutions like acute hospitals and in the community. And different areas in the NHS. And I've also been very lucky that I've had lots of opportunities. So engineering, I think, a combination of engineering and healthcare has opened up huge opportunities for me that perhaps I wouldn't have had before. So I was very lucky to get a Winston Churchill Fellowship and went to work at NASA for the summer a couple of years ago, looking at safety in the commercial crew programme, which was fantastic. And I've also done quite a lot of modelling in safety in football, in the English Football League. And I was very fortunate to be awarded an MBE for that last year. So we've done a lot of the modelling post the Hillsborough Stadium disaster of the 1980s. I think engineering can take you anywhere, and it's a fantastic opportunity. Thank you very much.
Alison, thank you very much, and thank you for dealing with the technical issues there. We could hear you perfectly, so that worked well. I'm now going to ask our fourth and final panelist to introduce herself, Sunita Weber-Mabu, who is currently an LSBU student of Chemical and Process Engineering. Sunita.
Thanks, Deborah. Good evening, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It's indeed a pleasure to be here and hear about the amazing work that others have done ahead of us. So I'm Sunita, and I'm a second-year chemical and process engineering student. Just like Linda, I was very passionate and crazy about microbes, and I did a first-year degree in BSc in microbiology, and afterwards I realized I had a passion for innovation, and with the environment being on the thread, I decided to pursue a career in chemical and process engineering, and it's been an amazing experience. It's been challenging, but it's been worth it. We've had the opportunity of getting some of the knowledge that hopefully will be useful at some point in the future. And we've also had the opportunity to work with other members in class on group projects. So that has given us a way of developing the soft skills and hopefully the practical knowledge to be able to solve those global problems. Engineering it's been really inspiring. It's been an eye-opener to some of those global challenges out there, and I just can't wait to finish and get started. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sunita. I like that really positive note, that you can't wait to get started. So I'm going to ask all the panelists to put their cameras on, and we're going to enter our question and answer session. We've got some questions in the question bank, and we've also got some that we collected beforehand. So I'm going to kick off, if that's okay. My first question is for Katerina, and it's this: what are the big problems in the world that engineering can solve?
Challenging question. So engineering is fundamental to help resolve some of the biggest problems of our time, and climate change is one of them. Looking into the future, also feeding an ever-increasing population that is expected to reach 10 billion by 2050. So looking into the future, looking into 2050, by then 70% of the world population is going to be living in cities. So we need to design the cities of the future. They need to be more sustainable than they are today. And so, for instance, in the UK, like 68% of the carbon emissions are coming from heating and transport. So it's quite essential to decarbonize these sectors. And we need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. And that much is clear. We need to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. We need to proceed with the decarbonization of heat so that both our vehicles and our homes can be powered by renewable energy. And smart local energy systems that integrate different technologies across heat, across power, across transport, they are key to help us achieve our net zero carbon targets. And that is just touching on the areas that we are researching in my group, but there is a lot more.
Thank you, Katerina. So engineering has got a crucial role to play in that space. Then the question I'm going to ask Linda is this: why do so few women enter engineering in the UK? Because it's not the same in other countries, is it?
That's right, Deborah. In other countries, it's much more common and normal for women to become engineers, but one of the things I've noticed over the years is that we do seem to regard engineering, like physics, as though it's particularly difficult. It's not difficult, let's face it. You know, you learn, you train as you go along. It's not difficult to becoming an engineer or becoming a physicist is difficult. And I think that is not the attitude in other countries. And I think that's a particular barrier for young women, especially because they probably grow up without being told that they're good at maths or good at science. I think that's got something to do with it. And also, as has already been mentioned, if you don't see a female physicist or a female engineer, why would you assume that you as a female could become one? If we're invisible, people don't know we exist. And it's very important that we keep getting this message out, that you can actually become an engineer of whatever sort you want to, at whatever level. There are many levels, academic levels and professional levels of engineering. And so I think that's the problem in the UK, lack of role models or lack of visible role models. And also this idea that you've got to be some sort of male boffin to succeed in engineering. I think that's what it's about.
Thank you, Linda. So I was going to ask Alison a question now, which is, Alison, how can engineering work with other disciplines? And that's a key part of your story and the way that you've used engineering to investigate a hugely wide range of issues. So how can engineering fulfill that promise?
I think one of the really good things about engineering is engineers are really good at asking questions. And sometimes that's the thing you can bring to the table, actually. It's a different perspective. And I think certainly when I've worked with, interdisciplinary, people are quite interested in technical skills, can you look at this data set? Can you do this kind of data mining? Or, can you solve a technical problem? But actually engineering goes far deeper than that, in terms of it being a way of looking at the world, I think, and the way that people with either an engineering background or just a desire to look at problems in a different way. And quite often that's what you end up bringing to the table, I find, anyway, in my personal experience. And that gives a really good synergy when it comes to solving real world problems. So I think there's an awful lot in engineering, and engineering as a career is so flexible now. I mean, when I started, the career pathways were, I think, probably just opening up in the 80s. And it's great to hear Linda's story, actually. I think that there's so much opportunity now as well for interdisciplinary working. It's only limited, I think, by our own imaginations.
Thank you. So I'm going to take that kind of idea about what it is that limits us and restricts us. And I wanted to ask Sunita, you talked about that kind of change that you had in, in terms of that shift from microbiology into engineering. What do you think, what has made your journey more difficult and what's made it easier to be a woman engineer?
I think for me, I had a lot of reasons to want to do engineering. One of them being I had a passion for innovation and for the environment. And being a parent, I remember I spent lots of times in the hospital because my son used to have croup and asthma, which were as a result of probably air pollution and other things. And I remember the doctor say, the reason for most of the asthma at the moment is because of the quality of air we're taking in. So for me, that was the real and the last push to make the decision to do engineering. I wouldn't say it's been easy, but I think as a woman, if you want to be a role model out there, you have to keep fear away, and you have to be resilient, because yes, it will be challenging, but if you have a reason for pursuing that career, it's going to keep you going. And for me, I had so many reasons to do engineering, so that made the decision a lot easier for me.
Thank you. So that's a fantastic story of that motivation and that interest. One of the questions we have from the participants was this. I'm going to ask it of Linda, and it's this: how can we all get involved in promoting engineering as an option to younger women? What's your view, Linda?
It's difficult because there's probably so many pathways we could choose to do this, and it's very important that we don't engage in tokenism. I do know from my own personal experience and the experience of people I've spoken to that there is still a divide out there in industry. There are some sectors of engineering and technology where employers still don't employ many women. There are software companies out there, for instance, who employ very few women. And you think, well, why? Why is that? It's software. It's not this traditional idea that a woman's going to have to wear a hard hat and big boots and climb up a pylon. So what's stopping them getting there? And I actually think a key might be about our own parliament. I hate to bring politics into this, but as it happens, I'm a political activist, and I absolutely want to see more engineers and physicists, biologists, chemists, mathematicians, of whatever sort in Parliament. At the moment, our Parliament does not reflect the private industry that engages in manufacturing, design, maintenance, all of that. We don't have proper representation of engineering at the top table. And I think what I would love to see is lots and lots of us standing for Parliament, standing for local councils. One of the ideas I've jotted down this evening, for instance, is I happen to be a town councillor, and I know occasionally we have to suggest names of streets. My own town council still has not named any streets after suffragettes, but now I'm thinking next time I bring it up, I'll ask them to name streets after suffragette engineers. But we just have to keep at it. We have to keep on keeping on, as they say. Talk to people, articles in the press, get involved with the Women's Engineering Society, get involved with other societies, the mechanical engineers, the physicists, what have you. Get out there, stand to be elected in your, in the Institute of Mechanical Engineers or whatever, stand for election, get your voice heard. If we don't get women's voices heard, nobody will listen.
Thank you. I love that. If we don't get women's voices heard, because it's all about politics, that's something else that someone's contributed to the chat. I've got a question for Katerina, and it's this. It's a question from the Q&A. When will it no longer be the case that women engineers are unusual? When is that future going to be?
That's a £1 million question. It all depends how it evolves. I think with social media, reaching out to people, it would become a lot more common. It's quite powerful in the sense that you can promote these role models, the fact that you can make women more visible and give them give children an idea how it is to be an engineer. What does it involve on a day-to-day, and take away those misconceptions about being a dirty job. She's in a way is part of the misconception. It's a bit about the language. One thing that Sunita mentioned is about the environment, and that using reframing engineering as the solution to, the way to address issues of climate change and improve the environment, that attracts women immensely, that language. So that's quite powerful. So I think it's a lot about increasing the representation, increasing the number of role models, pushing these stories out there, and changing a bit the language, so improving the perception of engineering overall. And we can reach critical mass with social media, so it might be that things move really quickly. It might not be so painful as it was in the past.
Thank you, Katerina. I like the idea that it wouldn't be so painful in the past. I've got a final question, and I'm going to ask it both of Alison and Sunita, and it's this. If you could give a piece of advice to a budding female engineer, what would it be? So I'll go to Sunita first and then to Alison. So if you could give a piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say you should be resilient. Obviously, the course on its own, it's quite challenging. So you need to be resilient. When you finish, you want to be able to work. So if work doesn't come, you still have to be resilient and keep getting yourself ready and hoping that an opportunity comes your way. But you have to work for it, though.
Thank you. So resilience as the key theme. I really like that. Alison, what would your piece of advice be?
I was just reflecting actually on my time, my very, very early years, and my work experience at South Bank, and it's actually the advice I give to anybody in career-wise. I met a guy there who was retiring when I was about 16, and he was retiring. He was a glass blower, and he worked in the basement of Borough Road. And he'd had the same job since he was 16. And I asked him what his advice was. And he said, if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And it was really good advice, and I've always remembered it. And I think that goes for any kind of career. As soon as it becomes tiring, as soon as it becomes something you fall out of love with, as soon as it becomes something you resent, then it's probably time to make a change. So that would be my advice. So it probably plays into what Sunita was saying about resilience. If you lose the love of doing something, you'll lose your resilience for doing it.
Thank you, Alison. So that's a strong note on which to end this part of the evening. It's about, how do we keep that love? How do we create that love in the first place? I think I can draw together the set of things that we've been talking about. I'm now going to hand over, so this is the end of our panel session. I'm now going to hand back to Claire, who will take us forward to the end of this session. Claire.
Thank you, Deborah, and thanks to all the panelists. That was so insightful, so interesting. Some great ideas there to get women into engineering, to keep women in engineering, and advice for future engineers as well. So thank you very much. I hope we can have many more interesting discussions like this across the event series. Again, I wanted to talk about our next event. It'll be on Ada Lovelace Day on the 13th of October. Will be jointly hosted by our staff networks for gender and Black and minority ethnic equality. And part of that will be an activity for younger students exploring what engineering is and who an engineer is. And then it will be followed by a panel discussion by wonderful women engineers discussing their fields and what it is to be a woman working in those areas. So hopefully just as many insights coming out of that conversation. Over the next few months, we will be adding more events to the program. Dean has been sharing the link for that, so I'm sure he'll share that again. We're going to be adding events on sustainability and environmental challenges, events on accessibility and how we make the world accessible. We'll be including discussions with women in construction and for International Women's Day. We'll be finishing off the series with an event for International Women's Day, International Women in Engineering Day on the 23rd of June 2021 to explore what we've covered across the entire year and see what insights we've gained across that. You can keep an eye on all the events on our Eventbrite page, which will be shared for you. When you registered for this event, you may well have signed up to our mailing list for future events, but if you haven't and would like to hear more about this series, please contact Dean Woodhouse at events@lsbu.ac.uk. Again, I'm sure that will be shared on the right in the chat. Dean has been sharing all of the relevant links for biographies and timelines, and they'll all be on our Eventbrite page as well if you want to see them. I'd like to finish by thanking everybody who's been involved in this. Thank you to Deborah Johnston for hosting this event for us and keeping us all to time and hosting such an interesting panel discussion. Thanks to our presenters, Helen Close from the Women's Engineering Society, Professor Shushma Patel and Ruth McLeod. Thank you to our panelists for telling us of their inner thoughts, Katharina Marquez, Linda Edwards-Shea, Alison Leary, and particularly thank you to Sunita Weber-Mabu, who is one of our students and I thought was incredibly eloquent, and thank you for taking your time out of your studies to talk to us. I need to thank everybody who's made today possible, especially Jennifer Hackett, Dr. Katrina Beaumont, and of course the man who's done so much in the background to organise this and future events, Dean Woodhouse. Thank you to everyone who's attended this talk. I've really enjoyed it. I hope to get a huge amount out of it. I hope we can all explore what engineering is and the amazing women who are part of this and could be part of it in the future to solve those global challenges, as Sunita says. I hope to see you at the next event. Thank you for coming.